All right, so we got Richard from Not Legal Advice. Richard is a fantastic host of the channel Not Legal Advice, where they talk about a bunch of different topics around the legalities of different companies, a lot of expertise around MMTLP, which Richard and his co-hosts and other folks have been covering. But then Richard also has covered Tesla very closely. And one of the things that Richard has helped us with is understanding the case around Elon Musk's comp package that was rescinded back in January or whatever it was by the Delaware judge. There has been a lot of moving pieces and very recent things that have happened with that case. Specifically, Tesla's fighting back some of the claims or some of the things that the lawyers are trying to get out of the case. And so we have Richard, our law correspondent, I guess, will officially from this second forward.
That's good. I accept
Congratulations.
That role. I accept that role.
Yeah. So maybe get us caught up on what has happened here in the last couple of days, Richard. Something has happened over the weekend. A lot of new information. So whatever you can do to help us understand.
So the basic issue where we are now is the court already ruled. They ruled against the pay package. The outstanding issue, and really where this thing really is, are the attorney's fees. And it's really the plaintiff's attorney's fees. And I'm not trying to be cynical, but this whole case is that. It's just plaintiff's attorney's fees. So plaintiff, and in these actions in Delaware, the way you figure out attorney's fees is the attorneys who want to get them file a motion and they ask for the attorney's fees. So the attorneys for plaintiff, and recall the plaintiff, the real plaintiff, had 9 shares. So he's really not a plaintiff, although he will get a bonus, usually like somebody who's the head of a class action or derivative suit. By the way, I'll explain that. So this is a derivative suit, which means it's for the benefit of the company. You could have a class action, which is for the benefit of the shareholders. That is not this. But anyway, the gentleman Toretta, however you pronounce his name, he'll get 10 or 15,000 bucks. The plaintiff's attorneys, their position was they had brought a benefit to the shareholders and to the company equivalent to approximately $55 billion. And they based that on that they were entitled to approximately 29 million shares. And at that time, based upon the value of the shares, that equated to $55 billion. I think it's slightly less now if you use the valuation, but they didn't change their pleadings. So they filed it, and they're basically seeking the $55 billion. And their point was they have provided a benefit of that amount. So about a week ago, Amy, who I'm sure you know, is a share.
Sorry, Richard. So the $55 billion is the total Elon compensation package, right? What he was supposed to be paid, and then the lawyers themselves, how much were they seeking from that $55 billion?
They said they were responsible for the total benefit. They are basically seeking about 11% of that, equivalent of about $6 billion.
Got it. Okay.
But they're seeking it in stock as opposed to cash. They could have sought it as cash, but they sought it as stock. So there's responses that are due. There's a bunch of parties. There's a bunch of defendants, like all the directors are defendants. Elon's a defendant. The company's a defendant. And so far there have been 2, let's say, defendant-related parties that have filed objections to the attorney's fees. Amy, who you're familiar with, I think.
SF Tahoe. Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So she filed it with the help of a law firm called Munger, Tolles and Olson, which is probably the best law firm in Los Angeles. Also one of the best law firms in the world. They only take Supreme Court clerks as their personnel. So my youngest dumb son, who went to Columbia and Harvard, he wouldn't qualify because he wasn't on the law review at Harvard.
What an idiot.
Yeah, what an idiot. So it's a very narrow group of people. So they have a very high level practice. And by the way, Charlie Munger was Warren Buffett's partner. That's when you hear whenever Buffett would speak about Munger, that's who he was speaking of. Munger founded the law firm. So pretty smart guy. So the argument that was made in Amy's objection and in Tesla, because Tesla filed an objection, I think, on Friday. Tesla, also a nominal party. They're still not the real party because Elon really is the real party. And basically the way that they looked at it is they looked at Delaware law, and Delaware law says the court can provide an attorney fee award equal to the benefit that the law firm provided, but it can't be a windfall. So it's guided by that outside principle. And the way they check to see if it's a windfall is they look at something called the lodestar method. And the lodestar method is you figure out the number of hours that they worked, you multiply it by what a reasonable rate would be for someone in that locality doing that specialty. You multiply that together, and that gives you a number. So in this case, when you did that calculation, 19,000 hours times a rate, I think it came out to be about $13 million. That was the rate. So you would use that as guidance to make sure that you didn't go so extreme. So the plaintiff's attorneys want that amount. In the responses, they say that the benefit to shareholders, if there was, and the increase in the value of Tesla, which is really the issue. Tesla moved in 2018. They were under 60 billion, I think, and they moved to over 600 billion. So their argument is that these attorneys had no involvement in that. They didn't provide the benefit. The benefit was provided by Elon and the company generating that. So their argument would be they would not be entitled to anything as a result of whatever benefit they attributed. Certainly not the 55 billion amount. And if in fact there was any benefit, it would have to be correlated to the option value. And the option value there was a calculation done by an accountant at the time the options were issued. They reflected a value, I think, of $2.3 billion. But on top of that, there may be some deductions off of that, and then you would do a multiplication of that. So if we did a 10%, if it's 2.6 billion, now you're talking about 260 million minus some adjustments. But they don't say that's not the proper way either, because, and I agree with this, by the way, I don't think these attorneys provided any benefit to shareholders. I think it's a detriment, because even in Amy's objection, she says if they actually got that, the effect would be a 1% dilution across the board for all shareholders. So how can you argue that's a benefit to shareholders when they're getting diluted? Doesn't make sense.
And so the argument of dilution comes from the fact that they would have to pay if we're going back to 2018 and say the comp package is taken away, so you revert back to those shares in theory, which wouldn't have, and because they're not really adding any value from that point forward is the argument, then really what's happening here is Tesla and Tesla investors by default, because shares would have to be created to pay these lawyers in essence, it would create additional shares that would then bring down the overall value of the Tesla worth of all shareholders by that same amount proportionally to each shareholder, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Because they'd have to issue 29 million shares, and that's out of thin air. And that so it's hard to understand how that would be a benefit, but we also have to put in context, this judge hates Elon, right? So she's probably going to try to craft a result that somehow will survive appeal. But let's kind of just follow that. So the first part is there's no benefit, so that can't be used. So what do you do if there's no benefit? So in some states, they use the lodestar method, and what they do is they'll do that calculation, and depending upon if it's like an extremely complex case, or it's really late in the case, or they had to go to trial, or some other factors, they can add like a premium on top of that. And historically, because it's in these filings, historically, the premium was anywhere from 1.4 to 3.7. So, maybe 15, just kind of doing rough calculations, maybe 15 million to 50 million using the figures we talked about. So that could be a way of doing that calculation. But lodestar is not used in Delaware. It's only used as a check. We talked about the windfall. So how else could you do it if you don't use that? You can do something called quantum merit, which means and this, by the way, it's interesting because this might also apply to Elon if he didn't get a pay package. So let me talk about that really quickly. So if let's say Elon loses, he's not getting paid. He obviously was operating under the understanding he was going to get paid or getting paid something, and that's why he's there. You would do some calculation based upon what was the reasonable value of his services. And that's a very subjective thing, but it would end up being some number and he'd have to be paid that because he provided the services, and that would be different than his claim, for the shares. So how do you figure out quantum merit? Well, one way you can do it, because again, this is very subjective, is you could look at the lodestar method. Go back to the lodestar method. How do you determine the value of attorneys? You look at their hours times the rate and you make a determination. So even though you're not using lodestar to make that determination, it's your guide for figuring the reasonable value of the services. So in the both oppositions, the highest number that I saw that they agreed to pay was in the area of $50 million. So even though they don't think anything should be paid, they would concede that at the top range, $50 million based upon these calculations. So I would expect the judge, if she wants this to be sustained, she can't come in. I don't think she can come in at $6 billion, and I don't think she would come in at $13 million. I think if she wanted it to get sustained, she would come in somewhere between 50 and 100. So it would be slightly higher than the highest that Tesla suggested, but substantially lower. And 100 million would be, one of the largest legal fees ever, but not the largest in Delaware. And just to kind of give you an example of where there was actually benefit, that you could see benefit by the attorneys. Dell Computers was involved in a class action in 2022 in Delaware. They were up through trial was about to start. They settled the case. So the shareholders were paid $1 billion. Literally, cash went in. The court said, okay, that's a benefit. We could see it. Cash is a benefit. We can quantify it. And they gave Dell, the attorneys, 26.6%. So like $266 million. And that was upheld. So it's okay. But again, that was very specific that there was a benefit that the shareholders in the company received. This is not that. So but I do think that the judge is going to try to, work backwards. She wants the result to stand, and she has a particular result in mind, and she's going to try to figure out some calculation that she thinks the appellate court will say, it's, not so much and not so little, and it's okay. And I think that's what she's working towards. So there will be some other objections or oppositions filed. The way it works is there's a confidentiality provision in that litigation. So they have to redact each filing. There's certain redactions. So they file it, and it might take a couple days before we see it because the redacted version's posted. And then there will be a reply that's going to be filed by the attorneys who are seeking the money. And by the way, it's interesting to me, they are probably promoting, my guess, I don't know this for a fact, but to the extent there's opposition to the fee structure and to the extent there's promotion of that, I would guess that the attorneys are the ones that are behind all of that. So, but I don't know. I don't know that for real, but I would think with the amount that they're seeking, it would be worth spending a few bucks to try to influence, the result. So they will file a reply, and then there will be a hearing. At least there's a scheduled hearing July 8th. And then the court will issue a ruling probably within a month. And then that will be, at that point, close in time, that will be the final judgment. And that will be the judgment upon which an appeal is taken. Now, I was talking whether would Tesla appeal like a $40 million attorney fee award? I don't know, but they would appeal the result. They might just pay the attorney's fees and be done with it because they could easily pay that. But the underlying result, I think they would still contest because I don't think they agree with the ability of the court to be able to set aside the shareholder intent. So that's what I expect to happen.
Got it. So super helpful rundown. Let me just clear up a couple points here. So the suit that or the countersuit that has been brought forward by Amy, where I think so. Correct me if I'm wrong. Tesla is mentioned as a defendant in that suit as well, or no, or the
They're,
plaintiff, or no?
they have an interest because
They have
because
an
it
interest.
impacts them. So you call them, they're referred to legally as a nominal defendant. They're not the central defendant, just like Amy is not a defendant, but she's a shareholder. So when you proceed in legal proceedings, you have to have some kind of stake, or else you don't have standing. She's a shareholder, just like you could. Anybody could do that. So you could hire your own counsel and do that. It's an expensive proposition, obviously. But you could do that. Any shareholder could do that.
So this is sort of her going on her own time, her own dime potentially, and bringing this forward, specifically targeting the fees that the lawyers are trying to collect, right?
Correct.
So that's one thing that's happening, which is very different from what Elon or Tesla or a combination of both, or however that's going to be brought forward, their countersuit or their appeal of what was passed in January through the Delaware court. So these are like two very different things, right? So
Yes.
we have an individual party who's a shareholder for Tesla that's saying, hey, these lawyers getting paid this much, or what they're calling for is ridiculous and stupid, and that
Right.
shouldn't happen. And she's taken it upon herself to bring that forward. And then in about a month's time, there's going to be a sit down to try to come up with the final verdict, I guess, or the final thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's really the biggest element of this, if the case, and it's not a countersuit, so just an opposition or an objection. And Elon's might be different than Tesla's, because I would think Elon, and again, I'm not his counsel, so I'm just kind of speculating. But if I were Elon's counsel, I would focus like a lot of time on all the benefits I provided to the company. I would lay that out in detail. And that goes more to his entitlement to the fee as opposed to the legal fee issue. But I would document it, because the way the appeal will work is they take the existing record. You can't supplement it. So if you didn't say it in the underlying proceeding, you can't bring it up on appeal. So you kind of want to lay it all out so you can kind of then raise all the issues on appeal. And again, Elon is yet to file a objection or opposition. I expect them to. And none of the directors have filed an objection or opposition. I expect them to also.
And what is the deadline for any of those objections?
It should have been now. So I'm literally expecting, I kind of look at it every day, and I expect to see additional ones. And somebody might make an application to the court to extend the dates and might need some more time. I haven't seen that as of yet, but they could. But we should see it any moment. And then the reply within a couple weeks.
And so with respect to the judge, in your opinion, you're anticipating that she's going to essentially look for the Goldilocks solution to anti-Elon corporate lawfare of not enough fees, but not too, the fees not being too hot, not being too cold. Got to get it just right so that you can screw them to the maximum amount possible without it getting overturned later.
Yeah, because you kind of have to balance. She obviously doesn't like them, and she, has her own, own position, and she has to kind of put that aside to make sure it doesn't influence what she determines in the end, not because she cares about that it's too strict, but exactly as you said, she wants her decision to be upheld on appeal.
How much is Tesla revoting, I should say, on the 2018 comp plan in about 3 days? How much of that timing is to try and overturn this decision?
What's interesting, so it's interesting, good question. So what happened was, at least one of them, after they filed their request for attorney's fees, they filed also, and after it appeared that Tesla was trying to move to Texas and they were going to vote on a new package, they filed a bunch of motions, and they basically tried to stop Tesla or Elon from using the move to Texas to undermine the decision in this case. So they filed like 4 motions. And then there was some response to that. And then the judge wrote a letter to all parties and basically said, okay, because Tesla said basically, we're not trying to undercut your decision. That's separate and apart. And the judge said, okay, I'll take it at face value that nobody's going to try to do anything in Texas to undercut the decision here in Delaware. And I'll put the burden on the attorneys. If what I say is incorrect, I will expect the attorneys to immediately correct me because they're officers of the court. Tesla responded, didn't see any type of correction. I think they kind of agreed that they weren't trying to use the Texas location to undermine it. I don't know if Elon will address it, but it was an interesting statement that the judge really put the burden on Tesla's attorneys to affirm the fact that they weren't trying to undo it by the move.
So I guess, So I guess what I find really interesting though is if her ruling was that the comp package is to be rescinded, which means that they have to go back and fix what she wanted fixed, which was administrative transparency things. It wasn't actually anything to do with the actual number of how much he was getting paid, even though the first line in her decision said, is the richest person in the world getting paid too much.
Right.
But then the ruling was you need to fix the verbiage of how you're related to the board and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
Okay. So then why would she take issue with anything that Tesla does to try and fix that comp package based on her guidance in 3 days? I don't understand that.
I can't speak for her, but it was an issue I raised. I actually raised it to Alexandra privately at one point. I would have preferred if all the opposition came from private, not from Tesla. So, so I see filings. I mean, I get filings like every day. I get a 14A or something, which relates to somebody at Tesla. Maybe it's a director saying, supporting they're putting out something and they're very careful. So everything is filed and it relates to supporting the pay package to Elon. And part of why the judge said she threw it out and didn't accept the shareholder confirmation was because they didn't have full disclosure, didn't know anything, didn't know the full picture in essence. So my concern is by Tesla pushing that the court could say, well, the shareholders were again kind of coerced and manipulated by Tesla putting this out. So that has been my concern because I believe Amy is an example, and just you guys. Listen, people talk about it. You have a big audience. It's not like Tesla. Most Tesla shareholders don't agree with the position. So
isn't this like what a public company is supposed to be?
Well, yes and no. In this case, I would have been more careful. I brought this up, by the way, from the beginning. It wasn't like I'm saying it now. I thought because of the way the judge, I'm playing to this particular judge. This particular judge says, you kind of coerce the shareholders. So anything that could be arguably coercing the shareholders, I wouldn't do. Because just to be, but to kind of take it one step farther, this is going to be appealed one way or the other, or both. So Tesla is going to appeal, but I guarantee you, if that attorney fee award is reduced, the plaintiffs are going to appeal too. And one of the things they're going to talk about is exactly this. They're going to talk about, listen, there wasn't a fair vote, and the reason why it should have been thrown out, and the reason why we should be compensated more is because of Tesla's intervention with the shareholders.
Okay, real quick, Hans, and I'll throw it back to you. Okay, but if the vote comes back with what seems to be, Elon put out a post a couple of days ago or yesterday, I forget when exactly. The baby, blurs the hours and the days nowadays. That 90% of the retail shareholders that have voted thus far have voted yes to both moving the headquarters or the incorporation from Delaware to Texas and reapproving Elon's 2018 comp package. If if that number comes across just as high, if not higher than it did in 2018, doesn't that send a message that her initial ruling was garbage?
Well, it does, but 90% of what? We don't know. Maybe it's 5 shareholders. Or maybe it's 10 shareholders. 9 out of 10 voted yes. That's 90%. There's going to be a certain percentage they have to get. And, I don't know if you've been following it, but kind of like this kind of started my experience with MMTLP. So all these brokers kind of do their own thing. They don't necessarily send out the notices to you to vote your shares. I don't know why. Is it because they're instructed to, or just because they're bad, or, whatever? But we don't know if that 90% reflects a real number. That's going to be significant in the final calculation. And, we know, because it's happened before, companies, if they go in and there's not enough of support, they can just kick the vote over until they get enough. And it surely seems, because I saw Alexandra posting it, but there's a lot of shareholders, especially outside the country, that really had a difficult time voting. So I don't know, in answer to your question, because it really depends on the numbers, not the percentages. And I think there, on the flip side, the institutional vote is probably not going to be like that. It's going to, it may be favorable, maybe, but there's been a lot of reports it's not going to be favorable, or in some percentage, and it's going to depend on what the numbers turn out to be. So the fact that right now it suggests their support doesn't provide me enough information.
So let's pose 2 hypotheticals then. If the vote to reapprove Elon's comp package does pass, and with not only percentage wise, but they get enough votes, is that something that then Tesla or Elon, as the main defendant, can bring up in this court case in Delaware as it's continuing to play out before it ends? And then on the flip side, if it does not pass, whether they don't get an approval percentage that's high enough, or they just don't get enough votes, in either one of those cases, is that also ammunition that can be used against Tesla in this court case before it concludes?
Yeah, so I'll start with the second one first. Yeah, I would say yes, because it kind of does. If you don't get enough support, that kind of makes, at least you'd argue it. You'd put it in, whether it's, really important or not, I don't know. The first one, if it gets supported, what's going to happen is, one, there'll be an appeal, but there also will be a new lawsuit. Because somebody's going to appeal the ruling here, but the pay package then is reconfirmed. Somebody now new, because it's a pay package. We go back to 2018. We've now reinstituted. Somebody new could come back and file a new action. That's why the stuff about the coercion, and because if you end up in front of the same judge, same court, you might end up with the same result.
But what I heard, though, is that the court could use ammunition from the same vote that they could also say you're trying to extort. Yeah. So the same vote, if it's to the court's favor, to the judge's favor, let's say, or to the defendant's favor or the plaintiff's favor, the one that's bringing the lawsuit forward and the judge, if the vote goes quote unquote wrong, they could be like, see, we told you. But if it goes the other way, they could be like, hey, what are you trying to do? How is that? What the fuck is that? What is that?
Well, I think, at some point in time, it'll probably get reversed if it's so out of kilter. It just may take quite some time to get, because it has to go up to the Delaware Supreme Court. The Delaware Supreme Court could either affirm it or adjust it or deny it. And then you have your next appeal is to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it would be, issue of whether this is permissible. Can you take away the authority and the power of the shareholders who have been told something and voted away? And, the issue of bias about the judge, there'll be a whole bunch of factors that would come into play. It's also interesting because, Elon accepted this judge on the Twitter case. And, if I was in California, so I don't know, I'm not in Delaware, but if I was in California and I filed a lawsuit and I don't like the judge, I get one free shot. So I can get rid of the judge. The next one I have to have cause for. So this this lawsuit was already ongoing. The one we're talking about today was already ongoing when the Twitter lawsuit was instituted. So it was interesting. They elected not to challenge the judge. I don't know if they would have a different opinion now, but it was interesting. Now, even if you wanted to challenge a judge, there's still other considerations, because if you challenge a judge, the other judges know it, who are in the same court, and they may not take kindly to that. Or you, as an attorney, might look at the other judges and think they're worse, and you may not want to take a shot at the other judges. So, I mean, there's reasons why you don't, but we kind of knew Judge McCormick was not going to be a friend here, and certainly wasn't in the Twitter case. That's why Elon had to settle that case.
So one of the things that you just mentioned was an appeal potentially going all the way up to the Supreme Court. And I think last time we talked about it, the Tesla only has the ability to appeal the judge's ruling to the Supreme Court of Delaware, correct? But then
Correct.
Are these objections opening up a pathway to appeal all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States? Or what's the difference there? Or am I misunderstanding?
Maybe I wasn't clear. So their next appeal is to the Supreme Court of Delaware, and they'd be looking at Delaware law. To get to the Supreme Court, then there has to be a constitutional issue. So is there an issue of due process, equal protection? You'd find something like that. And that would be the issue that the Supreme Court would decide. Maybe it would be, a taking. There's all kinds of, there's principles about getting just compensation. Maybe it's like that, but you'd have to make it into a constitutional question. Right now, it's just a Delaware law question, so that's why I would stick with Delaware. And it generally would be discretionary for the U.S. Supreme Court also, whether they took it or not. So, it's a somewhat conservative court, so they probably would not like the result. If in fact, let's say, just for the sake of discussion, let's say Elon's pay package is tossed out and the attorneys get a high award, I don't really think conservative justices would find that very appealing. That would seem to go against, capitalism and also seem to kind of pull any authority and powers that shareholders had. So I just don't think that would be well supported. So they might try to find a reason to take the case, but it has to go through we're at the point now. It'll be final maybe in August, then I think there'll be an appeal. It might take a year for that appeal. So now we're, let's say, August of 2015. Then if you want to go up to the Supreme Court, let's say they take it right up. Yeah, 2015, 2025. Then if you got to the Supreme Court, and if they took it and you got in at the right time, it might not be till June of 2026 that you got a ruling on that. So it's, quite a bit of time. I would think that by then Elon would be pretty, fit to be tied if he hadn't got his pay package. I would assume if they had moved to Texas, he would have gotten a subsequent pay package, but they would have to consider that too, whether that might work against him in getting the first pay package. Because if I were the Tesla board, I'd try to make sure that in the subsequent pay package, I took care of Elon for the prior pay package, and I might enhance his compensation. But that might be looked at in a very critical way also. Now, it may be the Texas court at that point that's making that decision, and I would think the Texas court would be more likely to let Elon keep it than Delaware. And also, there's also discussion. I don't know how this is going to play out, but there's a discussion that Citadel and BlackRock want to open up a stock exchange in Texas. So there may be a lot of movement of capital to Texas, and that might influence how the court in Delaware decides also, because they might decide, Delaware, I don't know what industry Delaware has, other than they collect fees for a bunch of entities that go there. And if they decide people are going to move away because they're too stringent, it might affect how they decide these matters.
What I find really, really interesting about this whole thing is that it's sort of exited this Tesla world, and it's really entered into the broader conversation. I've seen so many different voices come forward in the last few days and weeks. Business people, largely in the United States, that have nothing to do with Tesla or Elon, coming out in support of Elon getting paid. Who was the one gentleman? Pierre Diamandis or something? What's his last name? Diamantis? I forget it. Anyway,
Peter Diamandis.
Diamandis, yeah. The guys at All In and a bunch of other people as well, just business leaders coming out and saying, hey, pay the man, pay the man, pay the man. It's
Right.
anti-capitalistic, blah, blah, blah. So what I find very interesting is that it's not just like a Tesla thing. This is like a capitalism thing. This is a how the United States functions thing. And I wonder how, because you're obviously part of law circles, how much is this being talked about? Is this like something that's a point of interest by just people that are in the law profession that are curious about how this is playing out? How unusual is it? Can you give us an idea?
Yeah, I don't think it's, to my surprise, not everybody knows about it or has interest in it. So I don't think I think it's more of a business issue. So if I'm a CEO and I have a Delaware corporation, I don't want this ruling because I don't know when I'm going to be in that position. If I'm the CEO of NVIDIA, right, who at some point in time might be in a position to get a huge, he's getting paid well, but he doesn't get paid like, Elon. But at some point in time, he could justify getting paid top of the food chain. And there's going to be a bunch of those CEOs who are going to be at risk. So I think it's more the business people than the lawyers themselves.
Yeah. And then one thing I do want to go through, we were sort of role playing a little bit earlier, but in the event that, let's say, this thing doesn't pass, either because there weren't enough votes to pass the 50% threshold, or it was voted just whatever, it just didn't go through. Mm-hmm. What is the likelihood that Elon and Tesla have a plan B in place to try and get something through in Texas versus Delaware for him to get paid?
Yeah, I would expect them to, but it's going to be an interesting dance again, because they have kind of made representations to the court that they wouldn't do anything to undermine the decision. So if they do, and by the way, if I were them, I would try, and I'd have to be very discreet and do it in a way that really didn't offend the court. So it's going to be like jumping through hoops. But if the court sees that, what can they do? I guess they could try. Somebody would file an action. I think what would happen is somebody would file an action in Delaware, contesting the authority of the Texas court to challenge it, or they might file an action directly in Texas, contesting the ability of the Texas court to undermine the Delaware decision. That's why that letter from the judge was kind of interesting, because I've never seen it like that. Basically putting the burden on Tesla to say we're not going to try to undo it.
How big of a deal is Thursday then? Like how big of a deal is this vote within the context of everything we just talked about? Is it like a huge deal? Is it going to so if it passes or it doesn't pass, right? It sounds like it's going to dictate so much from this point forward, because it could influence how the court and the judge try to sort of strengthen their case against Tesla and Elon. But if it does pass, then Elon and Tesla have a ton of ammunition to go back and be like, you tried to screw me over, literally. It seems like it's a huge fork in the road.
Yeah, and I think it is. I think it is, and I think, beyond what you just said, I think, the worry is if there's sufficient number of votes and it doesn't pass, what Elon's going to do. What's his reaction? Because if I were him, I'd be I'm sure he's super pissed anyway. But then if the shareholders didn't back him, I think he'd be beyond pissed. And that's kind of the more practical side. In terms of the legal side, yeah, it's going to play out. The court will be aware of the vote, but they've already kind of taken the position. It doesn't influence us. So they would probably try to draft whatever final decision without reflecting that as being an influence, because they have, in their mind, they've gotten an assurance from Tesla that they're not going to contest that result. Other than they can appeal and all that.
Right. I don't know. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on this, but I have a hard time seeing how this doesn't pass on Thursday to his comp plan specifically. I think some of the early data that was sort of shared about, again, 90% of again, we don't know what the total number is, but 90% of the retail investors thus far that have voted yes. So no overwhelming support for those that have voted so far, which I'm assuming would be a pretty good representation of retail investors and how they're leaning. Because the ones that would have voted no would have voted, you would think. So I'm curious to see how the yes guys are, or the people that haven't voted yet, or maybe do not vote, what their thought process is. And given the fact that now in 2024, I think the retail investor base is higher than 2018 when this thing initially passed. I think in 2018 we were 30% or so, 33%, something like that, and now it's 43%. If you remove the people that can't vote, so Elon and I think members of the vote can't vote on, or I forget who can't or can't vote, but there's a significant percentage of the float that cannot vote on Elon's comp package. So it brings up the percentage of retail shareholders' influence on the vote. And if that 90% number is accurate, then that retail shareholder threshold, you don't need all of institutionals to vote yes. You need even 50% of institutionals voting yes will give you more than enough votes for this thing to pass.
You probably don't even need 50%.
Exactly, like 20% or 30%, whatever that number is. So there, and given that in 2018, a lot of those institutionals, they had outsized influence, and some of the biggest ones voted no back then, and still passed overwhelmingly with 70% of the vote. And now that the comp plan has been reached, and all the things were hit, and the stock. The market cap went up that 10-20x, which made a bunch of returns for those folks. I have a hard time seeing how this doesn't pass, to be completely honest. And I really do think that if it doesn't pass, I feel like Tesla and Elon would have known by now if they didn't have the numbers for this thing, because I'm sure they're talking to all the institutionals. I'm sure they're talking to all the large shareholders. Like, they have to have a vibe, no, of like how this thing's gonna go.
I'll defer to Hans.
I mean, I definitely think that they have a vibe, and I think everything that you said, that's likely, and it's one way that it plays out. But there's also been a lot of turnover in the stock. Like you said, the composition of the investor base has changed a lot, and so I don't know that it's reasonable to infer that the people that voted for in 2018 are all even still present in the stock, much less that they will vote the same way again. And so, yes, from our perspective, we support Elon, and from our perspective, it's easy to stack up reasons why it should pass. I agree that I think it's more likely to pass than not. But the other thing that, if you look at people like Leo Koguan, I think he entered the stock after the run-up. For the most part, I think he built almost the entirety of his position after all-time highs. And so for people like him, this is an obvious no vote. And, I find that extremely distasteful. I will call him Brutus to his face and not welcome him into any Tesla shareholder events that I hold the keys to. But, that is a position that it's understandable why someone who had the poor market analysis and timing prowess to decide to enter and build a huge position after 2020, that they feel shortchanged by the performance of the stock over the last few years, especially when you compare it to NVIDIA. And so it's like there's a whole set of people that just all you have to look at is the stock performance. I could have been invested in NVIDIA. I didn't. I made the decision to put that money in Tesla because of all these things that Elon said, and I'm not patient enough to wait another 5 years to see that happen. I missed out on the opportunity. I got FOMO. Now I'm mad, and so I'm voting no. And, I don't know what the percentage of that investor profile is in the overall shareholder base. I think it's small. I hope it's small. So that's why I think that that's going to not be able to win the day on Thursday. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I was going to say, since I deferred, I will say, is I think if there's enough votes, it will pass. And I think if there's not enough votes, that maybe Tesla might try a different strategy. They might go after the brokers and the agents who did the proxies for the voting, because that has been a concern. People have concerns about these votes. I think I remember Elon even talking about it, that the transfer agents or agents who voted, he didn't trust the agents to vote them properly. I don't see why that would change. And I think it would be a great move if shareholders are denied the opportunity to vote. And I couldn't, me individually, what am I going to do? I mean, I've been down this road, but what am I going to sue Fidelity and, spend gargantuan sums about that? No. But somebody like, Tesla would have a real reason to. Elon would certainly have a real reason to. So I think it's either going to pass or maybe the vote itself will be challenged.
Yeah, I think that whole thing that Alexandra has been, and again, it's just huge. Like the amount of effort she's been putting towards that has been incredible. Just how she's rallying all the retail investors and trying to get these brokers to allow owners of a public company to vote on issues for that public company. Like, it's so wild to say that wasn't a thing for some places before. Like, it's like how broken is anyway? I'm going to go down a rant.
What's interesting about that is the judge originally there were a bunch of letters that were submitted in support by shareholders. The court kind of dumped them, didn't look at them. In the most recent submissions, they were provided again, and the court has them on the record now. So all the shareholder letters that it was like and emails, it's something like 6,000.
So what changed?
Maybe the court decided, just for appearance sake, they should include it as part of the record. No reason not to. I don't know. There was no statement of why they did, just that they did, and it's in the record now. I thought that was interesting. So the Tesla shareholders are reflected in the record.
The only other piece that I was going to just point out was that if, Tesla is one of the most held stocks for retail shareholders in the entire market. And so if it's hard for retail shareholders to vote on Tesla, then what it makes you think is that by default, retail shareholders are not being provided with the opportunity to vote.
I think you're right, by the way. I think it's like one of those other kind of quiet problems that we don't deal with, probably because most times it's irrelevant, in the grand scheme of things. It's not going to come down to one vote. It's not like this pay package. It's just kind of rudimentary things. So maybe people don't. But I think there are, and I've heard people talk about it, that a number of shareholders are excluded and don't have a chance to participate. And it's a right they didn't give up. It's just kind of like taken from them.
So, and those individuals, they have legal standing to sue, wouldn't they? For sure.
Yeah. So here's the problem from somebody who's sued a broker. You have an arbitration provision in your contract. So if I have an account at Fidelity and I want to contest something at Fidelity, I have to go to arbitration. And the arbitration system is run by FINRA and is slanted so all the members of FINRA are all the broker dealers. They pay the money to FINRA to support its existence. And so FINRA has an interest in protecting the brokers, and discovery in an arbitration, a FINRA arbitration, I could really testify to this, is extremely limited, and it's only designed to deal with controversies about, like if Hans said, I didn't order 500 shares of Tesla from Fidelity on this date, and Fidelity would produce your statements and maybe your trading tickets, but that's it. If it was an issue beyond that, you couldn't get discovery, which is an issue with MMTLP. That was the issue. Mm-hmm. So the SEC and FINRA have all the data, but they don't have to turn it over because they have immunity. And when you sue the broker, discovery is very limited. So they don't have to provide the information either. So you are kind of SOL to some degree. certainly unfair, should be changed, but that's another one of the defects in the system.
Random question to circle back. So if we do get a new exchange that opens up in Texas, what's the likelihood that FINRA is also involved in whatever that new exchange is?
That's an interesting question, because Citadel is considered to be the anti-shareholder because they are one of the largest shorters in the world, maybe the largest one. So what I was thinking is, what would happen to the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ? Would that still exist, or would they change dramatically now to be the shareholder exchange? Because the new exchange in Texas will be run by members who are not going to be friendly to shareholders. They're going to have a lot of capital, but they're not. I mean, historically speaking, they're not. So it'll be interesting to see, one, if the New York Exchange and the NASDAQ survived, and two, if they changed their practices and became more friendly to shareholders and provided more benefit to shareholders. So I don't know. I answered your question. I don't know.
Great. It's just, it's frustrating to hear that there's yet another structure, I guess, call it, another complex or thing that is meant to protect all the players in the game, but it's biased towards the ones that have the most power, or the ones that can screw you over the most. And we see this in multiple, like medical industry is another perfect one in the United States. I mean, I've had my own experiences of that in the recent weeks, which I might talk about recently, but or soon. So that's very frustrating to hear. But I think what makes this story unique is because of the Tesla retail investor group being so large, and having this channel and other channels as well of people that, are Tesla investors that put information out there. That's sort of the uniqueness behind the story, on our own time, on our own money. Like, we're not influenced by anybody. This is all a decision. We're deciding to do this. Tesla has nothing to do with it. Elon has nothing to do with it. Literally, we are independent actors in here that are doing it because we want to, because we love to.
No, you're right. But should it be that you need like a big company with a lot of shareholders to argue the same point
I agree
that a little company would with very few shareholders? Should they be treated differently? They really shouldn't. But yeah, I think the fact there are so many active Tesla shareholders gives the group an advantage, because it's public and because they can do more as a group and because it's well known. But it points out the problem in the industry, that it exists for everybody. It's just that there are some entities and shareholders that can't speak up or don't have the means to. And obviously, I've been through that experience, so I can talk about that.
I was just gonna say, I really appreciate your insight into all of these matters. Regardless, for people who have watched Robert Kiyosaki and have never read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it's easy to dismiss that book because sometimes he can come off a little bit flaky in some of his interviews, but highly recommend that book without necessarily recommending all the points of view of Robert. And one of the things that he says about financial intelligence is, it consists of learning the skills of accounting, because that's financial literacy, investing, markets, but then also the legal side of business, because the legal side is the rules of the game that get played. And if you would like to win at the game, you need to really understand the rules. And so that's one of the fun things about, getting to examine how the rules work and how they operate with someone who is much more knowledgeable about this field than we are. Helps us to build up our knowledge set around that, and through the lens of Tesla, which is a fun use case to look at.
Thank you, by the way. Thank you for the remarks.
And
you're right. And because I was thinking, because I just went through a FINRA arbitration. If you knew I did it for a different reason. I did it because I was trying to expose the arbitration system and the defects in the system. So I made probably 30 videos on it. I would just kind of bring people up to date. But most people wouldn't. And so if you had an issue with your broker, you wouldn't know what the limitations were. And you might actually think that you had a good chance of prevailing. And again, I'm not talking about some obvious case where your broker stole your money or something like that. But if it was any kind of issue that was close and you understood it was slanted one way and you understood all the limitations, it would affect behavior and it would affect, how you'd proceed. And I also believe it should all be changed because it should not be to the benefit of capital and against the interests of retail investors, because it certainly doesn't impact large investors. Elon is like an exception, but like what recent, I don't know if you followed this, but recently GME, there's been a upsurge in GME.
More roaring kitty.
Yes. And there's the star is Roaring Kitty. And he apparently came out and he made some comments, not recently, but within the past couple of weeks, about his position. And there were concerns that the feds were going to come after him. I think they were more than concerns. At the same time, Carl Icahn bought, or he said he was going to buy Caesar's shares. Reason why it's believed he wants to buy Caesar's is because New York apparently is going to license a casino, New York City. And so people, at least he believes, it's going to be Caesar's that's going to get the license. And you can imagine having a license for a casino in Manhattan probably would be very valuable. But he basically did the same thing that Roaring Kitty did. He announced what he was going to do. And if Elon says today, I'm going to buy 1 billion shares of Tesla, and he does it, that should be no problem. But it is a problem because it would be deemed to be a manipulative practice to enhance the value of the stock. But in some cases, it's not enforced. So it doesn't seem to be a fair run there.
I'll give another example. I mean, do tell me if this works. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, all the different funds that were going short Tesla. They go short Tesla. They put out a piece. Worst company ever. Fraud. Elon sucks. Unprofitable. Going bankrupt. Nothing happened to them. Yeah, so what was that about? What happened there?
I agree. I mean, I'm involved in a security called Finger Motion.
Would you fix it already, Richard? Jeez, come on.
And there was this offshore entity that just produced short reports. They were just pure BS, but the way the algorithms work is they see the words and then they trade on the words. So it doesn't have to be correct, it doesn't have to last, but the action can happen right away. And so that party was sued. They're based in Australia. They got a judgment. Okay, what happens? Nothing. That's the end of it. But they could do whatever they want. They could start a new entity. There's no real way of enforcing that. And that happens.
Crazy. The little guy, like the individual, really is at the mercy of a lot of these bigger guys, and it's very frustrating. I really hope this, maybe a naive part of me hopes that this whole Tesla thing, like the retail shareholder, set a precedent to fix some of this garbage. I think there's very much an opportunity to do that. Kind of what you've spoken about is because there's so much attention on the story, and because Tesla has such an organic retail investor community that is doing this because on their own volition without anybody telling them what to do. And sort of everybody has come together around this one story with a lot of people and a lot of with individuals that are very, very smart, very, very bright. And they a lot of them are very wealthy. So they do have resources at their disposal to make stuff like this happen. And they have time and they have grit. I'm hoping this sort of helps create at least a tiny bit of momentum, positive momentum, not just to sort of clean up a lot of the garbage that has happened in Delaware, but also maybe set a little bit of a precedent for other folks to hopefully get some justice in a lot of these areas.
But you can see how much effort it takes.
It's brutal.
It's not an easy thing. And you might be successful, but it takes a lot of effort, takes a community. You have to have a community together. They have to be patient. And, because shareholders have different views and they get pissed off when they lose money and they lose patience and whatever. That's a hard hurdle to overcome.
The only other thing that I want to make sure that we just voice on this podcast before we end the conversation is a huge shout out to Amy. I know this has been a tremendous amount of hard work and effort on her part to raise these concerns that so many retail shareholders have, but don't have the wherewithal, the knowledge, the understanding, the means, the connections, whatever, to actually create a voice in this court in Delaware for us. And she has taken the bull by the horns and provided that voice for us. I know that her concerns echo the concerns that I have. And yeah, just tremendously appreciate that. And also thankful to her for being an early, she came on my channel when hardly anyone had yet. And so appreciate her support as well. And it's just cool to see her doing what she's doing. And I wish her tremendous success in this action, both for her own sake, but then for the sake of all Tesla shareholders.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think props to her, and in my limited interactions with her, I found her to be like extremely sharp, and so I was really impressed. And I thought, she deserves all the praise she can get for doing what she did. So props to her.
She's one of the smartest people I've ever met, and then coupled with one of the largest memory banks I've ever met, that she has the ability to store and recall information at an almost alien level. It's crazy.
And the one thing, and one little advantage she has career-wise is she was a paralegal at one point in time. So it helps her kind of understand the legal issues. And, again, it's, I appreciate what she's doing.
Me too. Like Amy, Alexandra, and everybody. I mean, everybody, every single investor out there, big and small, with a platform or no platform, everybody who's doing their part to try and at least, right some of the wrongs. I think, if people are more than welcome to have their opinion, but I think all three of us on this panel agree that there is a little bit of, I'm just going to use the word fuckery going on, and it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and Alexandra, again. Yeah, I same to Alexandra, because she's put so much time in and been so helpful and influential. Again, props to her also.
Yeah, the ladies of the Tesla community. How about that? Huh?
Right.
Stepping up. Yeah. Okay. Let's leave it.
No. Before we go, I got one to leave you with. Do you know why?
And I have a question too.
Okay, then you can ask me. Do you know why only girl babies are born? Because this applies to you, of course. Do you know why only girl babies are born on holidays?
Why?
Because there's no mail delivery on holidays.
Oh boy. Okay. All right. So now I'm a dad, right? So that kind of resonated with me differently. That's a 7 out of 10. That's a 7. Okay. Now you know what? That's a 7.8 out of 10. That's pretty good.
Okay.
All right. Wow. Ooh, it's amazing what happens when you have a kid.
It does changes your perspective, right?
My standards go down.
You have been baptized into the dad jokes.
That's right. Only dad jokes. Yeah. Obviously, your standards went up.
Yes, obviously. Yeah. Obviously. I corrected myself here. Yeah. Okay. Let's leave it with this question. And we'll go Richard and then Hans. Do you think the comp plan vote passes, yes or no, on Thursday, and by what percentage?
Yes. I was going to say yes, and since it's Tesla, I would say it passes 69% to 31%.
Well, since that's the obvious answer, I'll have to choose a new. I'll just say 55-45. Yes.
Okay, so you think it's not going to be that? You think it's going to be close?
Closer-ish. Because I think last time it was 71. I think it's going to be significantly less than the previous margin. But I think that's still not close. Like 10 points is a pretty big gap.
What I was going to say, but what everybody has to be prepared for is it may not end everything. So we might get a result, and we might think that the coast is clear, but it's not, and we still have to hang out and deal with it, which is okay as long as we know that. But if it doesn't pass, then I think that's really problematic.
I'm going to say yes, and because I have faith in humanity, I'm going to go 77% yes.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah. I think the no's, in my opinion, are a very vocal minority of people that have, especially the ones that have voted yes before and voted no now, that are making a lot of noise. I think they are low ethic people, and they're making a lot of noise. And I think that's influencing some of the opinions out there, in my opinion.
One question for you, Richard, is do the people who don't vote, do their votes get counted as no? Because I think that affects the...
No, it just doesn't get counted in terms of what the necessary quorum would be.
Okay, so it's the other one. There's one of them that is it the move to Texas where no votes are counted as no's?
There is some difference in the Texas calculation. But what's interesting is, I've seen no votes from institutional on the pay package, but yes on the move. Like the Norway fund, that was their position, which I thought was kind of an interesting position. They were no on the pay package, but they were okay with the move to Texas. So maybe you'll get a split vote. We were all kind of figuring that everything would be the same. Everything would pass or not pass, but maybe some will pass and some won't pass. I don't know.
And again, the ridiculous thing of this thing that to this day I cannot wrap my head around. This is a 2018 comp package whose tranches have already been fulfilled. How can anybody vote no? Anyway. It's just going to be another 3-hour long podcast if I go down that route.
I think if you vote no, it's a bad faith vote because you're really somebody has an expectation of compensation who performed should not have to whether you could argue about the size, but if you go in, if somebody offers me X dollars to do something, I do the job, that should not be touchable. Really.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think history will view these folks the way that they deserve to be viewed. So we'll see how that goes. All right. Richard, Hans, thank you very much. Hans, you can find him at Hans C. Nelson on YouTube and at Hans C. Nelson on X. We do a podcast every week. And then Richard at Not Legal Advice on YouTube covers a bunch of different lawfare type things. And he does an excellent job. And I highly recommend you go check him out as well. Any parting words? And Raw 999 on X. RAHRAW 999 on X.
I was thinking about that. I think about it. I should have done it the other way around.
Raw?
Yeah, raw, RAWRAH. Because RAH are my initials. I did it backwards. What can you do?
I see. I mean, you could just do at Not Legal Advice too.
I could. Yes, I could.
Yeah.
I could.
So, there's a lot of options. Okay. Any parting words, my friend, before we let you go, Richard?
Thank you for having me. And, best to you and your new family, and best to you, Hans, and your channel and your life, everybody. And thank you for having me on the show.